Hi everyone, today we'll be going over accounts, May-June 2022, paper 2-1, question number 2. This is structured paper 2, which consists 4 questions, 2 of 30 marks and 2 of 15 marks. And we're also given a time limit of 1 hour 30 minutes. And since question number 2 is of 15 marks, we will be attempting to solve this question under 15 minutes. Now without any further delay, let's get started. Yasmin is a sole trader. She has prepared a trial balance. Some errors are not revealed by a trial balance. Now for the first part of this question, we need to describe each of the following errors, and examples are not required. So the first error is error of commission. An error of commission basically occurs when any transaction has been entered using the correct amount and on the correct side, but in the wrong account of the same class. So let's write it down. An error of commission occurs when a transaction is entered using the correct amount and on the correct side, but in the wrong account of the same class. Now secondly, we need to describe error of original entry. So an error of original entry occurs when an incorrect amount is entered in a book of prime entry, because we're talking about original entry, right? Let's write it down. An error of original entry occurs when an incorrect amount is entered in a book of prime entry. Then for the third one, we need to describe error of principal. And error of principal occurs when a transaction is entered using the correct amount and on the correct side, but in the wrong class of the account. Let's write it down. An error of principal occurs when a transaction is entered using the correct amount and on the correct side, but in the wrong class of account. And this concludes the first part of this question. Now we can move towards the second one. We are given additional information. When Yasmin prepared a trial balance for her business at the year end 31st December 2021, the totals did not agree and the difference was entered in a suspense account. And now we are given those errors that were discovered which accounted for the difference. Let's have a look at our question first. We need to prepare the suspense account, clearly identifying the original difference in the trial balance and the totals. Alright, let's have a look above. So the first error was that goods for own use, which is basically drawings, right, had been debited to the drawings account, but no other entry had been made. So whenever we're talking about drawings, we need to subtract this particular amount of drawings from the purchases, right? So this error just indicates that this amount of 430 had not been reduced from the purchases amount. Now, since we are subtracting this amount of 430 from purchases, and we know that in a trial balance, purchases is always recorded on the debit side. And whenever we're talking about decrement, that decrement should be recorded on the side of that particular amount as well. So we need to record this 430 on the debit side under the heading of purchases in our suspense account. Let's do that. So we do not know whether our opening balance will be on the debit or the credit side. So let's leave a line above and record the purchases reduction of 430. Let's move to the second error. Returns inwards of 740 had been credited to the returns outwards account. Okay, so this 740 should have been included in the return inwards. So we need to add the 740 to the return inwards account, right? And return inwards is basically the sales return, right? And sales returns is always recorded on the debit side. But since we're talking about adding it, the addition of the amounts would be always recorded on the opposite side. So if the return inwards is recorded on the debit side of a trial balance, the addition of this amount or the adjustment of this amount should be recorded on the credit side in our suspense account under the heading of returns inwards. Let's do that. So that's returns inwards with the amount of 740. Then we also need to reduce this 740 from the returns outwards account, because instead of including this amount in return outwards, we had mistakenly included this amount in the returns outwards account. So we need to reduce 740 from return outwards. And return outwards is basically the purchases return, right? And purchase return is always recorded on the credit side in our trial balance. So we're talking about reduction. And reductions are always recorded on the same side in the suspense account. So we're going to record the 740 under the heading of returns outwards on the credit side in our suspense account. Let's do that. So that's returns outwards with the value of 740. Let's have a look above. Then for the third error, we are given an irrecoverable debt of 260 had been correctly recorded in the journal and in the account of the customer, but had been posted to the wrong side of irrecoverable debts account. Okay, we know that irrecoverable debt is a bad debt, which is essentially an overhead or an expense, which is recorded on the debit side in our trial balance, right? And instead of recording this 260 on the debit side, it actually had been recorded on the credit side as 260. So we require 260 on the debit side, right? So if we include 260 on the debit side once, then the debit and credit side just cancels each other. So there will be zero balance indicating our irrecoverable debt. So instead of recording it once, we actually need to record it twice, so that once it gets cancelled out with our credit balance, and then once it actually represents the irrecoverable debt of 260. So the total amount that should be represented on the debit side would be 260 plus 260, which results in the balance of 520, right? So basically, we just need to add this amount of 520 towards our irrecoverable debt. We're talking about addition. And whenever we're talking about addition during adjustments in our suspense account, that should be done on the opposite side of what it actually is recorded in our trial balance. And we're talking about irrecoverable debt, which is an expense to be recorded on the debit side. Now, this addition of 520 should be recorded on the credit side in our suspense account. Let's do that. So we can record it under the heading of irrecoverable debt. And the amount to be adjusted would be 520. Okay, now we need to figure out our original difference. We can clearly see that our credit side in the suspense account is the heavier side. So let's figure out the total first. That's just going to be the sum of these three amounts, 740 plus 740 plus 520, which results in the balance of 2000. Which is the same balance on the debit side as well. And now the balancing figure will be our opening balance or balance BD. And since we're talking about the balancing figure, in order to figure it out, we just need to subtract this amount from the total. In this case, that's 2000 minus 430, which results in the value of 570. Alright, this concludes our suspense account as well as the second part of this question. Now we can move towards the third one. We are given additional information. The business's draft profit before correcting the errors were 28,750 for the year ended 31st December 2021. And now we need to complete the following table to calculate the corrected profit for the year ended 31st December 2021. Okay, we need to adjust our first error. So let's have a look above. So our first error was that 430 had not yet been reduced from the purchases, right? So we need to reduce 430 from the purchases, And we know that purchases is actually subtracted in order to figure out the profit, right? So there's another negative as well. So two negatives make up a positive. So that's plus 430, which means that we need to add 430 in order to figure out our correct profit now. Let's record this. So for error 1, we will be adding 430. Now let's have a look at our error 2. Okay, this one, return inwards should include the value of 740, right? So we need to add 740 to return inwards, but we know that return inwards is basically sales return, and whenever we're trying to figure out the profit, sales return should be subtracted. So that's a negative, right? Which means that negative and positive, that will be negative 740. But we also need to adjust it to our returns outwards account, because we need to subtract 740 from the return outwards account, and we know that return outwards is basically purchase return, which is subtracted within cost of sales, right? But again, we also subtract the cost of sales in order to figure out our profit, so that's another negative. So that's three negatives, which make up again a negative, so that's negative 740. So the total to be adjusted would be negative 740 and negative 740, which results in the negative balance of 1480. So this is the amount to be adjusted in order to figure out the correct profit for error 2. Let's write it down. So that's 1480, but a negative balance, so I'm just going to write it in a bracket indicating that this needs to be subtracted. Now for the last error, irrecoverable debt should include the value of 260, right? But like I said before, if we include it once, that results in the cancellation and does not show the balance of 260 as we require. So we actually need to include the value of 520 in our irrecoverable debt, right? So that's plus 520. But we know that irrecoverable debt is an overhead which needs to be subtracted in order to figure out the profit. So that's negative and a positive, which make up a negative. So in order to figure out our correct profit, we need to subtract 520 as part of the correction of error 3. Let's write it down. That's 520, but negative value, so we will record it in a bracket. Now we can easily figure out the corrected profit. That's just going to be the sum of these four amounts. So that's 28,750 plus 430 minus 1,480 minus 520, which results in the corrected profit of 27,180. And this concludes the third part of this question as well as this entire question. If you found this video useful, make sure you like the video and leave a comment below. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so that you do not miss any of these videos in the future. Thank you.